It's a nice crowd. Do we have any folks here who are guests for the first time? Okay, great. Welcome. Maybe some members could actually speak to them at some point and tell them about all the wonderful things that we do. There's, let's see, not a whole bunch to talk about tonight. There was one thing I wanted to bring up, and that is that we are looking for a new family chair. Todd Williams had been leading this activity over the past, about a year and a half, 2 years, and was just doing a great job. And he had all kinds of neat activities for families with younger children, and the like, hikes and craft activities and that sort of thing. And unfortunately for us, he got a new job in Maine of all places, and so we lost him. So we're looking for somebody who's got an interest in carrying on a program like that. And I think a lot of folks who are here tonight probably don't have minor children anymore, okay? Just looking at the faces out here. But you may know somebody in your family, for example, who would be interested in something like this, or maybe you have a younger friend with a family who would be interested in leading an activity like this, and we'd love to have a chance to talk with them a little bit and see if we can keep this great program for younger people going. So again, if this interests you, or you know somebody who is interested, potentially of interest, please don't hesitate to contact Dave, chair at adk-gvc.org. You'll find all that contact information up on the website. Yeah, please just have them give us a ring. We'd really like to be able to see this program continue. So, that's the business from my end. I see Beth Wilder is dancing up towards the center stage right here, Wheeler. Oh, and she's got something to talk to us about, no doubt having to do with Finger Lakes Trail.
Yep. Good evening. Can you hear me through the mask okay? Yeah. All right. Yep. Okay, I'm going to get really close and personal here. Okay. October 1st, which is a Saturday, is our final stretch of doing maintenance on the FLT. A lot of you have heard this spiel before. As a chapter, we have accepted the responsibility of maintaining a section of the Finger Lakes Trail, which is about a 10-minute drive south from the entrance of Stony Brook Park. So it's a ways. I have right now 6 definite people who can show on that day, on October 1st, to help me. If any of you would like to join us, no prior experience is necessary, just a love of the outdoors, and I have tools that you can help trim bushes or do blazing, or even pick up branches ahead of me while I use a huge power mower. And I can just mow away, and maybe we can get the trail ready for the last people that are trying to do end-to-enders. So I have a clipboard here. If you could just print your name first and last, give me an email address and a phone number, I can get back to you, and I would appreciate help. And I'm going to be redoing some of the format next year because of our genetic makeup and the amount of gray hair that a lot of us are in possession of. I would like to switch some of the trail dates to during the week. It's really difficult for me to give up 3 full weekends every year because it requires a lot of coordination. So I'm going to be open to suggestions and ideas, and I would hope that as a chapter we can still continue this commitment. It gets harder, particularly in November. I write up everything and then I look at the numbers, and we kind of start out with gusto and then life happens, and with COVID it's been a little more difficult. So if you can lend a hand, and if not this October, next year, please put your name down. Thanks.
Thanks, Beth. You know, I just wanted to build on what Beth was saying right here, and that is that really nothing happens in the chapter unless people are willing to step up and do it. So, certainly if you have an interest in Finger Lakes Trail maintenance, it's a great way to just get out for a day and have a chance to meet with and work with some people, and it's just a great time. Finally, I'm going to bring up Katie Kuset, who is our programs chair, to talk a little bit about tonight's program and a couple of the upcoming programs.
Bill.
Oh.
You forgot Jackson.
Jack.
Can we hold for a moment?
Okay, Jackson, you're on.
You forgot. Hi, everybody. Hey. Just like old times, Bill was chair, and he would sometimes forget me. That's okay. I'm going to stand there. Well, ADK calendars. Who in the past has bought one? That's all? Okay, well, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Antarctic Mountain Club's calendar, this is the one for 2023, and difficult to see in this reduced lighting, but this is for sale, and as a member of ADK, of course you qualify for discount. If you come to the bookstore table after the program and you want to buy a calendar, and you know that you aren't a member of ADK, guess what price you pay? The same price, the same discounted price. So don't worry about that membership, although we'd love to have you become a member. One of our members is a volunteer at Montezuma Wetlands, and as a member of that organization, she is trying to raise money for the Wetlands Project, and therefore she is selling, through me at the bookstore, a map of the Montezuma Wetlands for the princely price of $1 per copy. So if you are interested in doing that because you have a love of bird watching, or you simply would like to drive around through the wetland complex and possibly see who knows what, and this map might be your salvation. At the very least, it will go for a good cause, and your $1 will be put to good use. So, it sort of led you on when I was talking about the calendar. I have 3 dozen calendars that I received yesterday from headquarters in Lake George. Unfortunately, I did not open the box until this evening when I transported it here to RMSC. And therefore, I wasn't able to look at the invoice for the cost of the calendars. And there seems to be a pricing error. So even though I'm talking about the calendars tonight, I'm sorry I won't be able to sell one tonight until I resolve the problem with the incorrect price. So next month, October, and then November and December, if there are any left, please stop over at the bookstore and buy as many as you'd like. A number of people have already placed orders with me by email, so that's a possibility for you also. Thank you very much. And oh, by the way, if you haven't yet seen it, our presenter for tonight's program has brought a number of titles of her books, and she'll be selling these at this table after the program. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jackson. And Kate.
Can everybody hear me? Thanks for coming out tonight. We're very excited to have Randi Minetor speak to us about national parks, a uplifting topic. And just to build off Jackson's push for the calendars for next month, October, November, December, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the presenters we have coming on those months. In October, we have New York City author and solo hiker extraordinaire J.R. Harris coming to speak about hiking in remote locations all across the U.S. and the world. In November, we have Kevin Flynn, who is a 7th summiter. He's going to be speaking about the Karstens Pyramid. And in December, we have Women's Solo Hiking Roundtable featuring Mark Brenner from Brenner Boozman Foundation Trail. And right now, we're happy to welcome Randi Minetor. Thank you.
Whichever one is working. They both work. Then having us. It's my husband, Nick Minetor, the photographer for most of our books. Thank you so much for having us. This is exactly the kind of group I want to be talking to. People who actually go out into the wilderness and do things and push the boundaries and take some risks. And I want to help you make sure that you come home safely, and I never, ever, ever have to write about you. So let's do this thing, shall we? Accidents and foolhardiness. That is the subtitle that my publisher, Lions Press, has been putting on these books since they published Death in Yellowstone, which sadly I did not write, some 20 years ago. It implies that people either stumble into unexpected trouble, or they set out to do something that anybody would know would be foolish, or what we have come to know as hold my beer moments. But that doesn't even begin to scratch the surface of how people get themselves into trouble in a national park. In my research for the books I've written for this series, I've found quite a number of ways that people get themselves into trouble, many of which have much less to do with stupidity and much more to do with skill gaps, bad judgment, or sheer bad luck. So let's jump right into it. Accidents can happen to anybody in any park. You can just as easily break your leg in Cobb's Hill Park as you can in Rocky Mountain National Park. But in choosing the stories to tell you, I've focused on things that really could happen to pretty much anyone, not just to the outdoor elite, although the outdoor elite do indeed get themselves into trouble in the parks. This is really about folks who just want to enjoy some time in the outdoors and want to push that envelope. Take, for example, these 7 people. This is the Valencia hiking crew out of California who tried out canyoneering in Zion National Park on September 14th. Wow. Wow, this is September 14th. On September 14th, 2015, so that's 7 years ago. 4 men, 3 women, they chose a beginner-level experience in Zion, Keyhole Canyon. A canyon just 1,200 feet long, with walls just about 100 feet high. They started the day by taking a 5-hour class in canyoneering skills run by professionals at Zion. They canyoneered in, this is the subway, which is down the Virgin River in the middle of Zion. Now, all these people were in their 50s, but they were not inexperienced. This was their first ever canyoneering experience, but they had climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. They had been other places together around the world, so they were not newbies to the concept of being outside. When this crew arrived in Keyhole Canyon, about 3 o'clock that afternoon, they started at the top and they rappelled down. The process involved 3 short rappels of about 30 feet each, after which they would wade or swim through Clear Creek Canyon at the bottom. They passed through this stunning slot canyon that was so thin they could put their hands on either side of the canyon as they went through. That morning, one of the members, Mark McKenzie, went into the park early and bought the permit to do this from a ranger. The ranger told him that the weather forecast for that day included a 40% chance of rain. Probably a heavy thunderstorm. In a narrow canyon like Keyhole, that could mean flash flooding that turned the canyon into a raging river. The ranger handed McKenzie the permit and said to him, "I would not go today if I were you." As the day went on, the chance of a heavy thunderstorm increased to 50%. The flash flood warning hanging in the visitor center went from moderate to probable. But Mark had bought the permit early that morning. He wasn't in the visitor center. He didn't see the sign. The National Weather Service sends out warnings of possible floods in the area to people's phones. But in Zion at the time, there wasn't enough cell service to reach people who were actually in the park. By the time the Valencia hiking crew began their descent into Keyhole Canyon, the warnings had become very urgent. They were using using shouting camps. Move to higher ground now. Act quickly to protect your life. They never saw the morning. They saw a bright blue sky over Keyhole Canyon and a clear day. So as they made their first rappel down into Keyhole Canyon, this is what was going on to the north in Colum Canyon. Thunderstorm with water just pouring down the walls of this canyon and down into Clear Creek. When the water came into Keyhole Canyon, they had no time to react. They were at the bottom of the canyon. The canyon filled in minutes. The flood rushed over the party's heads. And the following day, searchers found the first body among piles of debris washed downstream by the flash flood. They unearthed 2 more within the hour. Another canyoneering party discovered a 4th body still in the canyon. The last 3 came to light when searchers used dogs and sticks quite a distance downstream. If they had taken the rangers' initial advice to heart, these 7 people would have avoided what became the worst canyoneering disaster in national park history. So why did a group of mature, outdoor-savvy adults decide to go ahead with their adventure despite a solemn warning from a ranger saying, "I would not go today"? It very likely had something to do with one of the most dangerous forces among park adventure seekers: the false urgency of limited time. National park vacations are supposed to be a once-in-a-lifetime trip where we'll have experiences we can't have any other way. We'll go up to Kenai Fjords and watch grizzly bears catching salmon. We'll climb down we'll take Bright Angel down to the bottom of the Grand Canyon. We'll do all of these things that probably are only going to do one time. But when you spend time, energy, and money planning a trip like that, you want it to go off according to your grand plan. It's full speed ahead. Whether or not there may be dire consequences. Damn the torpedoes, let's do this thing. But what's the worst that can happen? If you have to cancel those plans, you'll be sad. That's all. More to the point, you won't be dead. But disappointment can seem more ominous than danger. This can lead people to ditch their families, strike off into the wilderness on their own, determined to have all the fun they think they will miss otherwise, which leads us to the second reason people die in national parks: the lure of solitude. Chris was just talking about this. Why do people feel that they have to go off into the wilderness alone? Why can't this be a group activity? I've discovered stories of people taking on some of the nation's most challenging mountain treks, all on their own, with a map, a compass if you're lucky, and their wits. Hiking or climbing alone may be just fine on some trails, but the tougher the route, the more important it is that someone know exactly where you are and how you are. You can't depend on your smartphone in the wilderness, as I'm sure all of you know. There may be no self-service in the backcountry. When they show you those self-service maps that 99% of the world or the country is covered, those little white parts, that's where we're going, right? That's where there's nothing. If you get injured and you can't walk out on your own, hypothermia can take you before anyone even knows where you are. But one hiking partner can help you get out of the woods, or she can go for help. So when Matthew Burklow set out on June 9th, 2014 to climb the highest mountain in Rocky Mountain National Park, it appeared he had done everything right to prepare for this trip. His goal was the summit of Long's Peak. That's where else would it be? The top there. One of the deadliest mountains in the entire national park system. More than 75 people have lost their lives in this park, on this peak, which rises to more than 14,000 feet. It's one of the 4 teamers, and it can be covered with snow all year. Matt Burklow had tried twice before to summit this peak, but had found it more challenging than he expected, by a lot. He was one of the most experienced hikers to attempt the mountain. He had thru-hiked the entire Appalachian Trail in 99 days, if you can imagine that. And he climbed to the top of other Colorado mountains, some of them, just about as high as this one. There are, as you can imagine, very specific and strict rules for climbing Long's Peak. They're listed at every trail. First, you need to climb well before dawn because you need to be off the summit before the afternoon thunderstorms start so you don't get hit by lightning. Lightning is, in fact, one of the leading killers in Rocky Mountain National Park. And people reaching the summit after about 2 p.m. are very much at risk for a literal bolt from the blue. But it's a clear blue sky and suddenly there's a bolt of lightning. It's one of the only places in the country where that happens. Weather is so changeable at Long's Peak that you need to carry everything from sunscreen to a parka to climb it successfully. Some sections of the route you really should be using technical gear, and members of your party should be roped to one another, especially when the slopes become steep and icy. But Burklow climbed alone. He had the proper gear, he had crampons, he had an ice axe to arrest a fall. He began his hike at about 2 a.m., giving him plenty of time to reach the summit before the storms. He took note of the fact, now remember this is June, he took note of the fact that a foot of new snow had fallen near the summit the day before, and that it was cold enough up there to coat everything in a sheet of ice. So looking through the images on his camera later, and there's the foreboding, rangers saw that Burklow reached the summit on June 9th. He was well on his way back with plans to make it to his pharmacy job by 4 p.m. when something went very wrong. No one knows exactly what happened. A patch of ice, a piece of loose screen, a twisted knee. But Burklow toppled over the edge of this section you see here, called the ledges. He rolled down the mountain 600 feet. The only saving grace was that he had found his plan with the rangers, so when Matt's wife reported him missing that evening, they knew exactly where to go look for him. Burklow did everything by the book, but a split-second mishap ended his life. Most people who die in national and major state parks do not play by the well-established rules, though. They are far more likely to be guilty of something else. Setting out unprepared for the conditions. Now I know you're all aware of the 10 essentials, right? Is there anyone here who doesn't know what the 10 essentials are? Excellent, that is great. So here they are, just in case you need to recap. There they all are, and I'm sure you all carry them all on all of your hikes: food, water, light, a compass, some way to tell which way you're going. All very important, but it's remarkable how many stories I encounter in which people, to be clear, mostly men, march up a mountain or into a forest for a lengthy trek with nothing more than a pint bottle of water and a granola bar. That was the case for 3 young men who decided to scale this beautiful thing, Mount Washington in New Hampshire, the highest mountain in New England. Not a national park, but someplace that my publisher asked me to write about. This was June 1933. 3 college students, 2 Harvard men and 1 from MIT, so they weren't stupid boys, brought bedrolls with them to hike up to the Lake of the Clouds shelter, but they carried no food at all. They had it in their heads that they were going to go up to the back of this this resort right here in Pinkham Notch at the base of the mountain and beg for food, and that they would just be showered with hot pots of beans, you know, as if they were, who knows what they thought they were going to get from this. But needless to say, when the kitchen staff turned them away empty-handed, they had no food on them at all. They had packed nothing. They ended up sleeping outside in the rain and started their 7-mile hike in the morning, chilled to the bone already, with no food in their stomachs or in their packs. Now, June on Mount Washington has very little to do with summer. How many people here hike Mount Washington? Okay. So you know all about that. You know about the shelters that the Harvard Mountain Club takes care of those shelters and keeps them stuff. Pardon me? Appalachian Mountain Club, excellent. Even better. So, but you know exactly what's available there. but also what the conditions are like. These boys encountered downpours, 40-degree weather, high winds, and they soon found that the light summer clothing they started out with was no match for these conditions. In the pelting rain, they lost sight of one another. There, that little hut there, that's like the cloud shelter. Two of the young men actually managed to reach Lake of the Clouds that night. They staggered into the shelter where they found other hikers who, by the way, were warm and dry. And they quickly took them in hand and got them blankets and food and took care of them. The third man, though, a boy named Simon Joseph, did not reach the shelter. A 3-day search finally revealed his last resting place on a ledge not 150 feet from a signpost that would have shown him exactly how to get to Lake of the Clouds. Utterly unprepared for the conditions on the mountain, the boy died of exposure. Which brings us to an important statistic. There's your pie chart. According to National Park data, 81% of the people who die in national parks are men. Just 19% are female. And it's very uncommon for women to die doing something truly foolhardy in a national park. Why is this? I do my best not to generalize about any gender, but there is plenty of peer-reviewed scientific research that shows us that men are more likely than women to engage in risky behavior from a very young age. We know that women can and do excel in hiking, climbing, other outdoor sports in great numbers, so it's not a question of strength or skill or agility. It appears that men are more likely to push beyond their own level of skill or preparation, taking a chance on their own endurance, and unfortunately losing. Many of the deaths among women in national parks are the result of accidents, automobile crashes, slips off a ledge, falling into an icy river or a lake or the ocean, and drowning. One thing that does cross all genders, though, people who think they understand much more than they do about what it means to explore a national park. These are folks who do not discuss their plans with rangers, who don't ask anyone's advice about what they will need. They just scamper into the wilderness as if they're taking a walk into the county park at home. They are out of their element and willfully unaware of the mortal danger they may face. Many people don't believe their own eyes when they look at a craggy mountain peak 5,000 feet above them, covered with snow, in July, and think about scaling it, even though they've never climbed a mountain before. They see a glassy lake like this one in North Cascades National Park, and they have no idea that the water is this color because it's coming from glaciers, and it's about 34 degrees. Right, that's exactly right. You can't swim in this water. They think that the buffalo and the bears they meet in the parks are trained zoo animals. And we hear all the time about the people who are gored by buffalo. When you go through the gate at Yellowstone National Park, they hand you a flyer that says on it, many people are gored by buffalo. It's really hard to miss. But national parks are not museums or zoos or playgrounds. They're also not nanny states. We take our lives in our hands every time we set out on a trail or step out at a viewpoint. It's our responsibility. No one else's, no rangers, no guardrails, no one else's, to take precautions and behave responsibly and to put more value on our own lives than on a selfie. Even if you know this, it can be tough when people you are with don't pay attention to your misgivings. That's when we encounter something we do experience at home, something that can be difficult to overcome no matter how old you are. Peer pressure. That old schoolyard impulse never really leaves us. If all your friends were jumping off a cliff, would you do it too? Well, if you were in a national park, you just might. Shirley Ladd and her friend Danny LaBlanche took on the toughest hike in Acadia National Park in July 2012. If you've been to Acadia, you know that there are no really tough hikes there. The highest mountain is 1,530 feet. The trails are very well maintained and well marked. You have to really kind of work at it to get into trouble there. But the signature hike in this park is the Precipice Trail, and this is the thin ledge that goes along. It's a 1.8-mile loop with a series of iron-rung ladders and scrambles through the first mile. Once you get to the top of Champlain Mountain, there's a gentle stroll along a downward slope to get you back to the trailhead. So it's really, it's about 0.8 miles that you have to go through. Danny climbed these tough trails all the time, but Shirley did not. And she didn't consider herself much of a hiker. But she didn't want to disappoint her friend who wanted to spend the day with her in the park and had chosen this activity for them. So here's the iron rungs that they were climbing. They were about halfway up the trail with Shirley leading and Danny behind to provide support when Shirley's foot slipped. She dropped 60 feet through the air to land on a granite switchback below. Everything in Acadia is granite. There's no way to soften a fall like that. There was a heroic 5-hour rescue effort, and this is an actual photo of what went on this ledge, during which Shirley never regained consciousness, and a team of rangers, paramedics, rescue volunteers, and oddly enough, 2 nurses who happened to be hiking that day, worked to get her off the mountain and to a hospital. One of the things they had to do was they realized they couldn't take her down. They had to bring her up to the top so that a helicopter could come in and land on the top of Champlain Mountain to take her out. This is why it took 5 hours instead of 2, as it might on any other trail. Unfortunately, Shirley was pronounced dead on arrival when she did finally get there. Many national park deaths happen just after that decision point, a moment when the victim tells their companions they've gone far enough and it's time to turn back. I've written about small group psychology in other books, and I can tell you that all it takes is one dynamic talker to turn an entire group into doing something that they had no intention in their lives of doing. My advice to you is simple. Trust your gut. Consensus is not always achievable on trail. Don't succumb to the need to go along to get along, especially if the result will put you in danger. And if you are the experienced person, don't push somebody to do more than they are truly capable of doing, especially if the situation could result in injury. By now you may think that everyone who dies in a national park does something foolish to cause their own demise, but some people are just in the wrong place at exactly the right time. If a tree falls in a forest, somebody might be under it. Someone might be riding a horse along a park road just when a rock falls off a mountain. A boy hiking with his parents may cross the path of a mountain lion he had no idea was there, or lightning may strike. Mount Katahdin, anybody here climb this? Yeah, okay, so you know exactly what's coming then. Scott and Carol Newland arrived after dark at the campground at the base of Mount Katahdin in Maine. Also not a national park for those of you who haven't been there, but it's the terminus of the Appalachian Trail, which is a national park. There were no official campsites in the platform tents left when they got there. So the ranger let them set up their own tent in an open space at the base of a tree. They bedded down for the night, but several hours later, a huge thunderstorm kicked up with a lot of lightning. Scott got up, went outside of the tent to pound the spikes into the ground more securely. He got soaking wet in the process. When I interviewed Carol about this 50 years later, she told me, he was wet, I was dry. That's what made all the difference. Sometime later, lightning struck the tree they were under. The lightning traveled down through the tree, through all the roots of the tree, and hit pretty much everybody in the campground. But the jolt went through Scott and Carol's tent most fiercely. It woke Carol. Carol was a medical student. She looked at Scott, and she knew he was dead. What she didn't know in that moment was that she had also been struck. Lightning had sliced along the entire right side of her body, ripped her clothing, entered her mouth, and damaged her tongue. She managed to communicate with a ranger who organized a rescue crew among, what else, the Boy Scouts in the camp, who made a stretcher and carried her out of the park. It took Carol 5 years of therapy to learn to speak again. But during that time, she finished her degree in psychiatry. She's living out west now, was only too happy to tell me the story when we met up in Fort Collins, Colorado. At that point, she also showed us her scars. She still has huge scars from that lightning, from all that time before in Maine. And of course, no story of rotten luck is more legendary than what happened to Julie Helgeson and Michelle Coons on August 13, 1967, the event that became known as the Night of the Grizzlies. It's hard to believe it now, in these days of environmental consciousness and wildlife protection, that there was a time when the National Park Service maintained garbage dumps in Yellowstone, Sequoia, and Glacier National Parks where grizzly bears could come and feed, and people, you can see them there, would sit on bleachers and watch the grizzly bears 30 feet in front of them chowing down. But that's how it was. You may remember, anybody in here remember Walt Disney's Wonderful World of Color back then? Remember a documentary, not a documentary at all, a feature film called Yellowstone Bears, where the bears were coming up to the cars like this? Those were the days. This is what made me want to go to national parks. Seeing this when I was 4 years old and thinking, oh my God, I want to go and pet the bears. Pet the bears! So on the night of August 13, 1967, Julie Helgeson and her friend Roy DeCock decided to hike up to Granite Park Shelter, one of the prettiest places in Glacier National Park, and camp outside there. They had no reason to believe that anything unusual would happen to them. Granite Park was one of the places where the grizzlies came to a garbage dump and fed at dusk. People would sit and watch the bears, then they would go off the bed. And Julie and Roy that night went off and found themselves a little place to camp, unrolled their sleeping bags. They went to bed in comfort under the stars. And then Roy awoke with a start when Julie hissed at him, "Play dead!" Still numb with sleep, he suddenly felt himself flying sideways. He smelled the rancid breath of a large animal, one with a huge paw that had knocked both he and Julie a full 5 feet with one blow. Roy managed to stay silent, a feat of incredible bravery, as the teeth of a grizzly bear pierced his shoulder, then his left arm, and finally the backs of his legs. Then he heard Julie screaming, and her screams became more distant. The bear had grabbed her sleeping bag and dragged the bag with her in it down the trail. Despite his wounds, Roy then leapt to his feet, awakened the nearest campers who were sleeping outside of a nearby cabin. They saw Roy's wounds, wrapped him up in a sleeping bag to try to stop the bleeding, and they climbed up on the roof of the cabin and began yelling uphill to the lodge to wake the people there. They had to convince the staff that someone had actually been attacked by a bear, but the party that made their way down the trail to see for themselves saw a bloody and shivering Roy, and no Julie. Remarkably, staying at the camp that night were a doctor and a nurse. So Roy got medical care right away, which saved his life. But the staff and visitors soon realized they were ill-equipped to go after Julie if an attack-prone grizzly still was wandering in the woods. They had to wait for some time before they could find the girl, and when they did, they discovered she was mortally wounded. The doctor quickly assessed her condition and set about doing all he could to make her comfortable, while a priest, yet another person staying in the lodge that night, gave her last rites. Julie died at the scene. Whoops.
Whoops.
Yeah. That's funny. Did it go to sleep?
That was a good question.
I can keep telling you the story if you want. Okay. So here's where the story gets weird. 20 miles away at the Trout Lake Campground, on the very same night, another grizzly bear menaced a group of young campers. This bear had been doing this all summer, but the rangers didn't really think anything of it. They thought it was kind of entertaining for the people who were camping there, because a grizzly bear had never attacked a human being in the park before. But this night, this grizzly bear took all of the food from these campers and then chased them into the woods. They formed a new campsite well away from the first one and tried to go to sleep. But soon the bear approached them again. This time, camper Michelle Coons happened to be the one that the bear got in his jaws. "He got my arm!" she screamed to them. Then her final words, "Oh my God, I'm dead." And she was. When the bear finally retreated, two of the other campers made their way down a trail to the nearest ranger station as fast as they could go. The ranger there almost didn't believe them. How could there be two grizzly bear attacks when there had never been a grizzly bear attack before? But when the rescue crew got helicoptered into Trout Lake and found Michelle's remains, there was no question about what had happened. Park marksmen went out, found the two bears in the two different places, 20 miles apart, shot them both, and found human remains in both of their stomachs. So they got the right bears. Long and careful analysis by all kinds of wildlife specialists finally determined that what had happened had been an astonishing coincidence. Glacier Park and Yellowstone both moved very quickly to close their dumps, and National Park policy got a major overhaul when it came to bears. Unfortunately, a lot of bears in the interim, a lot of bears that had come to depend. There we go, thank you. That they've come to depend on. There he is. Thank you, Bill. A lot of bears that had come to depend on that food from the dumps could not be, their behavior could not be modified. So unfortunately, they lost a lot of grizzly bears and their offspring in the ensuing 10 years. But that has recovered. But that's why we now have these bear-proof trash cans and why you have to hang up your food when you camp in one of these parks. Now I want to highlight one more way that people lose their lives in national parks, and it's important that this one be said. Malicious mischief. Some people, male and female, think it's pretty clever to try to end a relationship, especially a marriage, by bringing their spouse to a remote area of a national park where there are no witnesses and pushing them off a ledge. Let me be very, very clear about this. It never works. Stop thinking about it, because it never works. Oh, sure, the spouse falls and most surely dies, but no one is fooled that this has happened by accident. Now, if you're up for one more story, let me tell you about Dennis Larson and his wife of 3 weeks, Kathy Frost Larson. On an overcast, rainy day in October 1987, a pair of newlyweds decided to take a walk along Acadia's Otter Cliffs. That's that outcropping there. Dennis and Kathy strolled along the granite cliffs to watch for sea otters in the ocean waters. That's what he told park rangers later that evening. The newlyweds had made it a kind of contest, each of them trying to be the first to see the little critters that float on their backs in the waves not far from shore. Dennis said that the person who found an otter first would get to pick the restaurant where they would have dinner that evening. Then, Dennis said later, he heard Kathy scream. When he turned to see what was wrong, she wasn't on the cliff anymore. Kathy had fallen 81 feet to the bottom of the cliff. Rangers arrived in minutes. Soon there were 15 rangers and the Mount Desert Island Search and Rescue Team working to reach the young woman. out on the rocks while a U.S. Coast Guard boat came from Southwest Harbor to try to reach her with the water. They finally reached her, quickly determined that she had no pulse. She was pronounced dead on arrival at the hospital. There's Kathy. 2 days later, the park announced that it would establish a commission to investigate the circumstances of the death, the park's role, and preventive actions the park might take in the future. It seemed that this would be the last we would hear about this really sad story. But during the routine investigation, the story started to change. First, there are no sea otters in the Atlantic Ocean. No one would have told Dennis and Kathy they could go out to Otter Cliffs and see otters. It's ridiculous. It turned out, however, that in 1975, long before he met Kathy, 25-year-old Dennis Larson, a carpenter by trade, had been married to Leslie Reynolds, who'd also met a sudden and tragic end. There's Leslie. Dennis told authorities that he and Leslie were collecting mushrooms along Prickly Pear Creek in their native Montana when the creek's banks broke away in the rush of snow runoff. Leslie fell into the water, and the swiftly flowing creek carried her 600 yards to its confluence with the Missouri River, where she vanished forever. No one witnessed this accident. A brief investigation took place, but the body never emerged. Police filed a one-page report, and Dennis collected $20,000 worth of life insurance. Years passed. Dennis married again, this time to Janine Whitney. When the couple began to run into financial troubles, Janine divorced Dennis, ending their marriage just 4 months before he married Kathy Frost. Dennis moved from Montana to East Millinocket, Maine, ostensibly to seek more lucrative employment as a construction electrician. He kept in touch with Janine, promising that he was building them a financial future in hopes of reuniting with her in 2 years. But while he was making these promises, Dennis placed a personal ad in the Bangor Daily News and the Bangor Review. Construction worker, 37, 5'7" inches, 125 pounds, active outdoorsman, seeks compatible child lady, 20 to 35 years old, for a lasting relationship. Well, not lasting that long. Kathy Frost, a nurse's aide, responded to the ad. He called her in mid-August, asked to get together. She accepted. Dennis thought they seemed compatible. He later told a police detective. He began to push for an immediate marriage just 2 weeks after they met. Kathy said, "Why don't we live together?" before that. But he insisted, no, they had to be married. In what must have seemed like wild romance, Kathy accepted his proposal. While they made plans for a quick wedding, Dennis sent letters to his second wife, Janine, telling her he would soon have money, so they would soon be able to reunite. Janine wrote back she was in a new relationship and had no interest in Dennis whatsoever, but nevertheless, he persisted. Kathy and Dennis married on September 20th, 1987, without him telling his new wife about his first marriage. The newlyweds went out the day after their wedding and bought themselves a new bed for the home they would share. They bought something else, too. What do you think that was? There you go. Sure enough, while they were at Sears, Dennis steered Kathy to a sales representative from Allstate, and they bought a combined universal life insurance policy of $300,000 on his life and a $200,000 double indemnity life insurance policy on Kathy. Double indemnity means that if she were in an accident, he would get $400,000. When police detectives discovered the insurance purchase, the entire tenor of their investigation changed. Authorities found that Kathy had written in her diary the night before that she did not want to return to the cliffs that day, but her new husband insisted. Then she turned up dead. The state of Maine charged Dennis Larson with the murder of his wife. Larson pleaded not guilty, and then inexplicably waived his right to a jury trial, taking his chances with the judge. The judge deliberated for less than 3 hours, just enough time to write his decision, came out, and slapped this guy with a 50 years of jail sentence. While this is one of the most complex stories of murder in the park, the same basic scenario is played out in just about every park that has high ledges. The murderers always end up in prison. Here's why. No one is fooled. The accidents always take place in some wilderness area with few visitors. What are you doing there? Especially if you're not usually wilderness people. Why would you go there instead of going to the beautiful places with the guardrails and the views and all the places that are very easily reachable? How did the spouse fall? What made this person get that close to the edge of the cliff? Isn't the view just as good 10 feet back? How many people knew that the relationship was already on the rocks? And don't you think they're all going to beat a path to the door of the nearest police precinct to tell the police all about how you've been arguing for the last 6 months? Finally, and this is key, how are you going to benefit? How is the survivor going to benefit? How much life insurance does your spouse have? Is there a prenup? What is going to be the payoff here? Insurance companies have seen exactly the scenario play out in national parks across the country and around the world. Every park with high cliffs has one of these cases, from Acadia to Zion. The story is all in the same way. The living spouse in prison, no one receiving the insurance money. So, I hope you've learned a few things tonight that will help you make smart choices the next time you visit a national park. By all means, visit as many national parks as you can. I've been to 346 of the 424 national parks with my husband, and so far I've made it home with nothing worse than a sprained ankle. So see these amazing places. Have wonderful adventures. Just be careful out there. Anybody have questions they'd like to ask? Yes?
How did you collect all these things?
Oh my God. Some of the parks keep lists. Glacier National Park at Mount Washington and Katahdin all provided me with lists of people who had died in the park, so that was very helpful. The rest I have had to do a lot of searching. And it's not easy, but the wonderful thing is that just about every newspaper's archives, dating back into the 1800s at this point, are now online. In those you see Ancestry.com has that, newspaperarchives.com, newspapers.com. So I can just keep searching, for death X National Park, and I can compile quite the list of these things. This was tougher with Everglades because they actively hide when things happen in their park. So, yeah. Oh yeah, I also, yes, we have spent a lot of hours in the dusty attics of small libraries in little towns, especially in Maine, Millinocket, Maine. We both had asthma attacks from the dust coming off of these newspapers. Spent a lot of time with microfilm and microfiche, which is still a thing, believe it or not. So yeah, there's a lot of searching. Yes?
What are the statistics with children being hurt with
It's less common, although you certainly find those stories, but there's a lot of people to protect children. Most of when something happens to a child, it's either because there were no adults around, like the 10-year-old Boy Scout whose friends dared him to go out on a ledge at the top of Angel's Landing in Zion that no human being should ever be on, and he fell 1,100 feet. And those are the kinds of, it's the I double dog dare ya stuff that happens to children, and the occasional abduction. But mostly, and the kids that fall into rivers and lakes and things like that. But it's not nearly as many children as it is adults. Yes?
Did you find that
lot of people disappeared or
Like
things like that. They
disappeared,
assume
never-
they're dead, but they never found the body.
Yes, there are, every park has a few of those. And there are, they become the stuff of legend. But generally, you know, this is the thing, the search and rescue people in the national parks are obviously some of the best in the world. And they are relentless, and they will keep going as long as they can. But there are some that have just vanished. Most of them, you can assume that they fell into a crevasse somewhere and have long since decayed, and you know, maybe a bone will be found one day. There are stories of some being found 20, 30 years later, and DNA, using DNA to identify them. I don't know. Oh, I don't know what, yeah, that might be, but, yeah. Yes?
Yeah, is there one from the other place that's short?
Ooh, wow. You know, the funny thing about the Everglades is that they're mostly murders. Yeah, it was a weird thing working on the Everglades book, because so many of them are bodies found in the canals. Because, you know, you're not going to fall off of something in the Everglades. The highest point is 11 feet, you know. So you're gonna drown, or you're gonna be lost in the wilderness. There's one in particular that does come to mind. I don't remember his name off the top of my head, but 1929, and he had driven down from New York State with some friends, and they didn't want to be in a car with him anymore. He was apparently a nut job. So he went off to get his car repaired, drove across what became Alligator Alley, which was fairly new at that point, came back some other route and got himself totally lost in the middle of the Everglades. And they finally did find his car, but he had wandered off into the wilderness somewhere, apparently looking for water, and vanished. So they got the Seminole Indians, who are still living in the Everglades, have their own settlements in the Everglades. They brought them in, and everything you've heard about Native American trackers apparently is true. That they had ways of figuring out where he had gone, and they found him. They found his body. It took them 6 days, but they did find him. And he had long since died of exposure, you know, the opposite kind of exposure, heat exhaustion, rather than cold.
I'm surprised the alligators consume the onions.
You know, it's funny. The first line of my book, Death in the Everglades, is, I really thought this book would be about alligators. And it really isn't. Alligators do consume dead bodies. If you drop a body into a canal, they will eventually eat it. But it has to decompose quite a bit before they'll bother, because it's just too big. So there are very few alligator attacks. In fact, there's never been one in Everglades National Park, at least not a deadly one. Most of them are really up further towards the Orlando and, you know, more in central Florida than in South Florida. There's plenty of other things for alligators to eat. They are opportunistic feeders and are not going to wrestle with a human body if they don't have to. Learned a lot about alligators. Any other questions? Yeah.
Any spectacular ones from Yosemite National Park?
Well, sadly, I didn't write the Yosemite book, but the one that always comes to my mind immediately is the 3 people who decided for some reason they had to stand in the river at the top of Yosemite Falls to take pictures as if there's anything to see at the top of a waterfall, and they all washed over the falls and they died. That's just a few years ago. Teenagers. So that's the kind of thing that you hear about most often in Yosemite, is people being really, really foolish about the water. But I wish that was my book, but sadly it isn't. Yes?
So are the parks seeing increased deaths more recently due to the Instagram generation?
You know, really not. They're certainly seeing more accidents. And I think Grand Canyon in particular has seen an increase because of the selfie people. But even Acadia gets people who stand out on the rocks and are doing this and plop right over into the ocean. On the rocky coast of Maine, you're not going to land on the beach. You're landing in the ocean. Yeah, it's mostly not deaths. It's mostly, but there are a lot of injuries for people being really foolish about that. Yeah, no, your life is not worth a freaking selfie. Yeah. Pardon me? We do a lot of walking, yes. But we, pardon me? Yeah.
Can you repeat the question?
You're asking, do we walk or do we? I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. I just.
No, the question is that you use open rubber, no, you don't go, I can use the equipment, or you just all the equipment?
Oh, the equipment. No.
What is the question?
Right. Okay. Yeah. You're asking like, do we do the technical hiking with the equipment and all? No. In all honesty, I have a heart condition I inherited. I am not allowed to do anything particularly strenuous above about 3,000 feet. So unfortunately, I was never going to do any technical climbing. So no, I've had to interview a lot of people to learn about it. And at the beginning of the Rocky Mountain book, I do put in the disclaimer that I am not a technical climber. I don't know anything about that. But we do a lot of hiking. I do try to see as many of the places where people die as I can to get an idea of what they're up against and how such a thing could happen. Did that answer your question? Okay, good. Okay. Yes?
What is the rate of worker, national park ranger deaths to civilian visitor tourist deaths?
Oh, I don't have the exact statistic, but it's very rare for a ranger to die during a search and rescue.
Right.
Yeah, it's not very often, thank goodness. I know there was one in Glacier where one of the divers trying to find a boy's body in Lake McDonald drowned. Got the vents essentially and drowned. And there have been other things like that, but generally the search and rescue people are some of the best hikers, climbers, technical people in the world. And they all support one another. They do their best not to take chances, which is why some of these searches get called off if the weather gets too bad, particularly on Long's Peak. Sometimes they just can't do anymore without possibly endangering themselves.